Hey friends, today I want to talk about something that's always a constant struggle in the garden. How do you deal with weeds? If you're growing a vegetable garden, the weeds are going to come along and they're going to consume the nutrients, and there's a limited number of minerals and nutrition and all in the soil to support the vegetables that you're trying to grow, or the fruits, or even the flowers that you might be trying to grow. So you don't want weeds in your garden. So you need to get rid of the weeds. But how do you do it? That's what I want to show you today. I just finished cleaning out some of my raised beds for the end of the season, and you can see a lot of the weeds that I have pulled up and cleaned as I cleaned out the bed. I still have one more bed to clean, and you can see this has some black-eyed peas in it. I think I picked all of the black-eyed peas, but we still have the old plants that are in there, and there are some weeds also that are mixed in, and we want to get rid of that. And now's a good time to do it. It's the end of the growing season, and it's a good time just to clean everything out. Now we've got all kinds of craziness going on in this raised bed. First of all, we've got these old black-eyed pea vines that need to come out, and we'll deal with that. But I'm not so much worried about those. We can actually leave those in the raised bed and cultivate them into the dirt, and they will add nitrogen back into the soil. But what I'm more concerned about are things like this weed. Here's one kind of weed, and here's some other kinds of weed, and this right here is actually what we call a cat weed. This is a small cat, and he likes to be part of my video today. But he's a very friendly fella. But we want to pull out these weeds, but we don't want to just break them off. See, if you just break off the weed like that, you think, well, I've gotten rid of it, it's done. But you haven't. That weed is going to come back. The roots down in the soil will just re-sprout, and a lot of times the weed will come back even more vigorous than it was before. So in order to deal with weeds and a lot of problems in life, you got to pull it out by the roots. So what we're going to do is we're going to get down as close to the soil as possible. And then we're going to kind of just dig around it a little bit, and then get our fingers right down deep at the surface of the soil. And I just like to kind of wiggle things back and forth a little bit, and we're going to get that whole root to come out. And see there, we've pulled out that whole root ball. We've taken out all of those roots. And so this weed is done. It's not going to be able to come back. There's nothing left in the soil to spring forth life again. So if we want to really keep our garden beds clean, we're going to have to get rid of all of those weeds by pulling them out by the roots. And it can be a little bit time consuming, but it's better to do it right than to have to continually deal with weeds. Because if weeds get out of control, they can really cause a havoc in your garden. Your garden is not going to have the nutrients that it needs in order to really thrive. You won't get a very good harvest, or you won't get a harvest at all. Weeds can be so vigorous that they will take over and completely destroy your garden. So you want to be sure to get those weeds completely out. Pull them up by the roots. Now there are some things you can do to make pulling weeds a little bit easier, creating conditions in your garden where it's easy to get rid of the weeds. One of the main things you can do is have good soil, good friable soil. That means that the soil is loose and easy to dig in. Well, it's hard for those weedy roots to really dig in and clamp down on that soil, and you can get your hands in there and you can really start to pull it out and get rid of it. But if the soil gets compact and hard, then it's really hard to dig out those weeds. You may actually have to use a shovel or a pitchfork to get up under those weeds and get them out. Now, another thing you can do that makes pulling out weeds a little easier is to use a raised bed. Because, you know, when you're pulling weeds, you got to bend over and get down to the level of the ground to pull out those weeds. But with raised beds, you can build those beds up. That's why they're called raised. And depending on how high you raise them up, you may not have to bend over at all. The raised beds that I have in my community garden at church are about 2 feet tall. And they actually have a ledge along the edge of the raised bed, so you can sit down right on the edge of the bed and just bend over and pull those weeds. And of course, the soil inside of those raised beds is incredibly loose and fertile, so it's very easy to pull those weeds right out of that bed. It makes weeding a lot easier on your back and just a lot quicker to get it done. And the better you can keep weeds out of your garden in the long term, it will keep them from reproducing and multiplying, and you'll have less problems with weeds in your garden over the long run. You know, a lot of people complain when Jesus Christ came on the earth 2,000 years ago. Although he taught a lot of great things, there are also a lot of things that Jesus did not say. Why didn't he explicitly tell people to not own slaves? Jesus came to pull out the root of our sin. There are a lot of different kinds of sins that people struggle with, but the root sin is the fact that we have rebelled against God. We try to take control of our life when what we really need to do is surrender to God and let him be Lord of our life. If we can get that part right, then all of the other things start to fall into place. If you turn away from that one main sin where we try to take over control from God, where we try to wrest lordship from Jesus and become lords of our own life, if we can get rid of that, then everything else begins to fall into place. And that is what we see in the world around us as well. Just take the example of slavery. Yes, unfortunately, it took 2,000 years for Christians in America to outlaw the sin of slavery. It would have been great if that had happened sooner, and it could have happened sooner. We had to let the principles that Jesus brought into the world to take over our lives. When it comes to sin, if you simply pull off the outwardly visible sin that people are struggling with, it's just like what we find in the garden with weeds. You can cut off the tops and you can pull off the leaves of the weeds, and you can even rip off the stem of the weed and rip it all the way down to the surface of the soil, and it seems like the weed is gone. But if you have ever spent any time in the garden, you know that that weed is going to come back. Unless you pull it out by the roots, it's going to come back. And when we address the symptoms of sin, the individual bad behaviors that people do, whether it is slavery or whether it is sexual sin or whether it is alcoholism or whatever it is, those things you can tear them off so that they're no more visible. You can't see them anymore. But the root is still down deep in a person's heart. And Jesus said, you must be born again. In other words, you have to become like a whole new person. You got to let God pull out your old heart and put a brand new heart inside you. And until that happens, it doesn't matter what you do on the surface, because what's in your heart is going to continue to come back. Just like a weed in the garden that continually springs forth again from the roots. So, just like weeds, we have to pull out sin from the heart and get rid of it in the core of our being and replace it with Jesus Christ as the Lord of our life. Because when he becomes Lord of your life, then he starts to take all of those other things and make them fall into place. Matthew 6:33 says, "Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all of these other things will be given to you as well." Are you seeking the kingdom of God and his righteousness, or are you trying to do something else? I hope you will seek the kingdom of God, because then all of the other things will begin to fall into place. And that's for you as an individual, and that's for us as a society as a whole. So let's try to do that. Let's pull out those weeds in our garden and in our life. And then let's get out there and let's grow and be fruitful.